So the topic tonight is the status of men. I've looked at this topic for a paper I did at the Institute of Marriage and Family Canada, where I work, imfcanada.org. I need to put the plug in for them since they give me the opportunity to come and speak different places. I have long thought that if I could be Prime Minister, I would run on a platform that would include eliminating the status of women department. It's an unfortunate, wow, this is a great crowd. It's an unfortunate, unnecessary propaganda peddling machine that panders to victim mentality feminists and strongly suggests that women need defense from men by our federal government. And I also dislike it for perpetuating the idea that there is a gender wage gap, which there isn't, and for promoting abortion as a cornerstone of women's rights. And I'm sure I don't need to tell this audience that it isn't, among other concerns. So I know what you're thinking right now. You're probably thinking, she should tell us how she really feels. I know this would be hard to do in our current political climate. I'm aware of the fine art of compromise in all things political, so I would soften the blow from my many adversaries by replacing the status of women with a status of men. So tonight is an evening to discuss how that would look, the diminished status of men in our society and our culture, and how it affects family and marriage. Also, how the diminished status of marriage affects men. I think this is important because we have spent many decades discussing the status of women, believing that women needed special attention to overcome past wrongs. An unintended consequence of this, I think, was to sort of constrain our thinking such that people believe now that if we focus exclusively on women, that will result in effective change, or that if we focus exclusively on men, that will be the way to go. I hope to not perpetuate that myth. We work together and one gender is happy when the other is. So if you'll permit me, I think with all of the focus that we have on women, I will spend one half hour tonight talking exclusively about men, hoping not to perpetuate the myth that we are separate and independent and autonomous. I'm going to look at the concrete situation on the ground, some of the problematic stats pertaining to how men are doing. I will look at what happens to our culture when men are struggling and women are constantly the focus of our attention. We'll ask the question of whether little boys actually might not need more attention to become men who are confident in their male identity. And what I'm also going to do is take a bit of time to examine a book called Men and Marriage by George Gilder. And he examines masculinity in this book and male identity, and he puts forward a strong case that lifelong marriage to women is a positive force for men. So this is Canada in 2011. The very first question I get from hostile media is whether this theory applies to men marrying men, and the short answer would be no. So I'll be an advocate for Gilder's thesis tonight, and then I'll outline some of the consequences of ignoring it. I do find today, incidentally, that there is widespread agreement on the fact that there is a problem. I noticed recently, and watched it as well, that there was a CBC documentary called The End of Men. And I do want to say I kind of agreed with their analysis of the situation. I think that where the problem arises is when it comes to solutions. And so often in our culture today, I find that the solution when it pertains to men is that men should become more like women. So that's not really a workable solution in my books anyway, and that's where the disagreement arises. But it's nice to know that at least there's an acknowledgement of certain facts on the ground. The facts are then as follows. I'll spend some time outlining where I see problems with men, loosely put, in our culture today. There are economic reasons to look at the status of men. The recent recession was in some corners called a man session because so many men lost their jobs. In 2009, the unemployment rate was 9.4% for men, and the unemployment rate was 7% for women. There are social reasons. Some of our social problems affect men disproportionately, things like homelessness and the crime rate. Gangs are, as you will know, almost exclusively a male phenomenon, and in part, gang violence is caused in part by fatherlessness. Male suicide rates are 4 times those of females and have been increasing. in recent years, since the 1950s. There are also reasons pertaining to education. There are higher dropout rates of boys from high school and lower rates of men in university. The high school dropout rate among young men was 12.2% in 2004-2005, compared with 7.2% for young women. I should add that the male dropout rate has always been higher, but this is a bigger problem today when you consider how important education is to get a job and to be employed. At the university level, 59% of Canadian undergrads are women, so almost 60% of undergrads are women. Another issue today with men is something that might fall into the failure to launch category. Nearly double the rate of young men are living at home with their parents today, between the ages of 20 and 29, as compared with 1980. So those are some reasons. There are more reasons. You could write a whole paper or do a whole talk on cultural reasons that men are the butt of every joke on TV, and advertisements find it to be A-OK to make fun of men. Any wise, sage man on television is probably gay, and so the heterosexual man is not portrayed in any positive light, or rarely portrayed in positive light. Marriage rates are declining, and by the end of this talk I hope you'll see why I list this as a problem for the decline of men. Over half of first unions are now common law for Canadians aged 20 to 29. 69% of families are married parent families, so close to 70% of families are married parent families, but that is down from 92% of families in 1961. And one final reason to really spend time discussing the declining status of masculinity today is the terrible proliferation of light beers. Certainly this is a terrible, terrible sign of an over-feminized culture, and credit for this very major point goes to my colleague Peter John, who read my work and gave me that advice. So compare and contrast this for a short second with the never-ending stream of concern for women. I just kind of, without thinking too much, jotted down all of these thoughts, and I'm sure you have some of your own as well. And this is a short list then of the focus and the attention that we see on women today. We need more women in politics, in business and engineering departments. We need them as heads of universities and CEOs of companies. We need to ensure women have special hospitals and pink ribbon campaigns and health care awareness campaigns. Women need protection from domestic abuse. We need special programs to cope with female body image problems and self-esteem and eating disorders. We need reproductive health campaigns and extraordinary levels of funding for women's groups. We have a special focus on single mothers in general and single mothers in poverty in particular. We give sole custody almost exclusively to mothers. We warn against fathers as abusers and men as rapists, particularly on campus. A surefire way to ensure a sizable grant in your university program is to tack on an assessment of gender to your thesis. And a surefire way to ensure that your message is heard on Parliament Hill is to get a woman to say it, whether that be on the topic of gun control, equal parenting, wheat boards, or abortion. So don't think that this sort of message isn't lost on me and that I don't use it to my advantage where I can. But needless to say, there's a lot of information and attention to help women, so much that you could hardly begin to address it all. So enter the book, Men and Marriage. I think it's a book that helps us find the fire, as William Gairdner said at a recent Institute of Marriage and Family Canada event, so that we can fix the problem instead of throwing water at the smoke. I saw this book on my friend's bookshelf, actually, and was intrigued by it. And he's a smart guy, university professor. I asked if I could borrow it, and I'm glad I did, because in actual fact, you cannot find this book in either of Ottawa's university libraries, which is really a shame, and I have to wonder whether there's some sort of conspiracy as to why it's not there. I absolutely loved reading it. It was like the pieces of a puzzle coming together, chapter after chapter, and I felt like it really explained many of the social and economic phenomena we see around us in a completely new, non-feminist analysis of the world. And I hasten to add that this doesn't mean that it's derogatory towards women, far from it. I really felt like he was giving the key to civilization to women and saying,